Hello, this is our Facebook live stream for the Secret War documentary. So hi everybody. I'm Lisa Blackstone. I'm the producer and director of the Secret War documentary. This is Lee Pao Xiong, who is the director of the Center of Hmong Studies and a professor of Hmong Studies at Concordia University in St. Paul. For those of you who aren't in Minnesota, Concordia University in St. Paul is the only place in the world where there's a Center for Hmong Studies. So Lee Pao Xiong is the man for that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm going to just talk quickly about what the documentary is, and then we'll talk about the Secret War specifically. So the documentary is going to be about the Secret War in Laos from the Hmong perspective, hearing personal stories from people who were part of the war, whether they were fighters, whether they were nurses, or people who lived the experience, even though they weren't fighters, and then also the refugee experience, and then finally coming to the U.S. The bulk of the documentary will be the past, and there will be a little bit of sort of the more modern day part of the story. So the documentary itself is part of a larger project that Twin Cities PBS is doing on the Vietnam War, which is related to a big documentary that Ken Burns is doing, a 10-part documentary that Ken Burns is doing on the Vietnam War. That will air sometime in the fall this year. We're not really sure when, so we don't have an air date for ours yet, but it will air around the same time as the Ken Burns documentary. So keep your eyes on the TPT Twin Cities PBS Facebook page and Twitter, because we'll let you know when it's on. And it will be online eventually afterwards. So for those of you who may not be in the Twin Cities, you'll be able to watch it online as well. We do have some other, I'm going to look at my notes here. We do have some other projects that are part of that larger Vietnam project. We have something that we're calling the Story Wall, which will be online, and it will allow people to kind of submit their own stories about the Vietnam War experience, about the Secret War experience. It's not live yet. Again, keep your eye on Twin Cities PBS Facebook, and we'll let you know when that goes live. We're so looking forward to having many, many people contribute to that. Another aspect that we're doing is something called the Telling Project, which is it's a big theater project that basically takes veteran stories, turns them into theatrical presentations, and then the veterans themselves perform their stories. And it's done all over the country. So we're having a number of them done here. And two of the stories are Hmong stories. One is a Hmong fighter, veteran, and one is a Hmong nurse, both from the Secret War era. So that, again, will be coming around the whole Vietnam project. So, and we'll have all kinds of other events and discussions and that kind of thing throughout the year. So keep yourselves tuned to Twin Cities PBS. Just a plug. So, so the Secret War. What is the Secret War? So, for those of you who don't know what the Secret War, I'm going to turn it over to Lee Pao.
Sure.
Tell me what is the Secret War? What was the Secret War?
It's a secret war that's no longer a secret, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's a very important war within the context of the Vietnam conflict, and basically, you know, it holds the key to the fall or the success of the Vietnam War. And the Secret War takes place in the country of Laos, right? So there's a couple of dates, really important dates to know. 1954, when Dien Bien Phu fell, when the French fell to Ho Chi Minh, right, to North Vietnam. There was the Paris Agreement, which basically said, okay, so we're going to have an election in 2 years, right? We're going to create a borderline, and so North Vietnam, you stay where you are, and the South, you stay below this line, right? And so as a result, hold your horses, right? Hold your ground, and don't intrude each other's territory. And oh, by the way, don't go into Laos, all right? Don't go into Laos. But Vietnam, the Vietnamese was in Laos, and the Russians was in
already they were
Laos.
in
Yeah,
Laos.
well, they're using Laos as a staging area to supply their troops in the Viet Cong in South Vietnam. So in North Vietnam, they're the Viet Minh, right? The North Vietnamese army. Those that were fighting against the United States and fighting against the pro-West government of South Vietnam were actually called Viet Cong. And so they're guerrilla fighters, resistant fighters. And so they were using Laos as more of a staging ground, but also transporting their troops and supplies to the Viet Cong in South Vietnam to fight against the pro-West Vietnamese government. That's the term Ho Chi Minh, right? Ho Chi Minh Trail. And so that lasted until 1962. 1962, then there was another agreement, and this agreement was the Neutrality of Laos agreement, basically saying, all of you guys are in here, so everybody needs to leave, right? America needs to leave, and Vietnamese needs to leave, the Russian, the Chinese need to leave. But what really started that conversation was there was a military coup within the country of Laos, and that was led by Cong Lê in 1960. So he took over the country because he was sick and tired of all the political factions within the country of Laos fighting with each other, you know, and they couldn't agree with each other. And so he was trained by, he was part of the paratroop, he was trained by the United States. Yeah. And the United States trained him how to do a coup. And so basically he took over the capital, Vientiane. And there were 1,000 of them only, right? And so they took over the country. And the first thing that he did was that he made an announcement that the United States need to leave the country of Laos, which was the biggest mistake, right? Because when you think about it, you know, the reason why we're involved in Laos was that Eisenhower terms it as Laos as being the cork in the wine bottle. And this is all around the whole domino theory. He believes that if the country of Laos, which is strategically located, you know, in the middle, it's a landlocked country surrounded by Vietnam and surrounded by Thailand, Burma, and Cambodia, right? And then north of that is China. So the United States was very fearful that if the country of Laos fall, that whole region would turn red, would be communist, right? And which it did when the United States pulled out, the whole region, almost except Thailand. Right. And so basically, it was part of a larger scheme of things. And so when Captain Cong Lê announced that he wants the United States to pull out, the United States said, we're not going to let that happen, right? So what do? They send in Colonel Belair, a CIA operative, who worked he was a colonel because the Thai gave him the colonel position. He was a border patrol agent.
Belair?
Yeah, Belair. Oh. And so that colonel was not from the American side, it was from the Thai side. Oh. And so he married into the Thai royal family as well. And so his job was to make sure that all of the communist excursions and so on and so forth won't get into Thailand, won't compromise the safety of Thailand. And so he's been working in the hills and so on and so forth. And so the United States said, okay, you know, Belair, you have a new assignment. They sent him to Laos, and he actually helped, again, to retake the country of Laos back, right, from Cong Lê. But he went in there, and then after everything was calm, he sought out General Vong Pao. So on January 4th of 1962, he went and met with General Vong Pao and said, you know, the communists are coming through here. What do you want to do? You know, and General Vong Pao said, we cannot live with the communists. And before that, the communists have mistreated our people, right? We cannot live with the communists. And so Belair said, what do you need? I need arms. How many people can you produce? 300 to 10,000 troops for you. Wow. You know, so within a matter of a couple of days, weapons start falling from the skies, right?
Literally.
Yeah, literally. Wow. And that's how, you know, but United States in 1962, because of the Neutrality Agreement, the Paris Neutrality Agreement, United States was not supposed to be in Laos. Everyone was supposed to pull out. But the Vietnamese were operating clandestinely in there, and the Russian was supposed to keep the Vietnamese away, but the Russian didn't honor that either. All right, and so the United States said, okay, we can play that game. We can play that game, and so we're going to use indigenous forces to fight against you. And so thus the recruitment of the Hmong and many of the lowland Lao in the southern part of Laos, particularly the Montayard and among the Bro. And so started working with the Hmong, and the Hmong basically assisted the United States in, and at first it was more of a defensive, right, from the 60s. And the war, the reason why it's called secret, let's going back to that. The reason why it's called secret was because United States was not supposed to be in there. Nobody was supposed to be in there. And the Congress didn't know about the war, right? The American public didn't know about the war. As far as they know, we're fighting in Vietnam, right?
And that's it.
And that's it. We're fighting in Vietnam, you know. And so this war was held closely, was basically managed because Kennedy and Johnson didn't trust the CIA because of the Bay of Pigs failure. And so so basically it was under the authority of the ambassador. The United States ambassador William Sullivan orchestrated the whole war basically behind through the embassy. And so what you have is that you have, you know, a couple factors there where the State Department was working with Ambassador Sullivan, where you have the CIA working under Ambassador Sullivan, and then the Hmong people working under the CIA. So we were surrogate soldiers of the United States Armed Forces. In fact, in his William Sullivan's memoir, he basically said, they are our people. Okay,
the Hmong.
The Hmong. We provide funding for them. We clothe them. We feed them. They fight for us. They are our army. You know, because we're not supposed to be in there, and so that's why it's secret in a sense that they didn't want to violate the neutrality agreement, but everyone was violating the neutrality agreement. Everyone was in there, but that's why it's called a secret war. No one knew about the war. It was closely held between the president, the ambassador, the State Department, and the CIA.
And part of the CIA.
Yeah.
Let me just have a second here because I forgot to do something. I forgot to say to people who are watching, definitely write in with questions on Facebook because we have a fabulous team of fine women back here who are ready to note questions and send them this way. So if you have a question for me about the documentary, Lee Pao about Laos, about the Hmong, about the war itself, I will leave that knowledge up to you. I will say that I think you would be okay answering in something in Hmong, yes?
Sure, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
that's
we
fine.
do have somebody who is one of our fine, intrepid staff members who's on the project who does speak Hmong, Gao Li Vang, who's back at the table there. Hi, Gao Li, she's behind the camera. And she can forward some Hmong questions to us as well. So if you have questions in Hmong, we can work with that as well. So don't worry about that. I think one of the things that, so now I'm going to ask Lee Pao some more questions. I think one of the things that people are really, really surprised about is that that the CIA was making a war.
Yeah.
I mean, and that it wasn't part of like the U.S. involvement in a military sense in the war, and like the CIA even had a charter air service called Air America.
Absolutely, which came from, you know, Continental Air, and they were part of the Flying Tigers during the war in China, and helping Chiang Kai-shek, right?
Wow.
And so eventually it transitioned, and then you got the airline, right? So in all wars, if you control air, you control land, you control communication, you control the war, right?
Wow.
You control the war. So, but I think, you know, again, when you think about it, you know, prior to the CIA becoming CIA, it was the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, you know, and so soon after OSS was, I don't know whether we can call it disband, but it merged into the CIA. It became the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency.
Yeah.
And this was the first time, you know, I think that the CIA actually got involved in running a war. Right, running a war. When you think about it, and because they basically trained us, right, equipped us, trained us through Bill Lair, and Bill Lair brought his own team. You know, he brought the Thai Paru, and Bill Lair also could speak Lao, speak Thai, and he brought the Thai in. So they blended in very well among the population, and people trusted him, right? So one year I had a chance to interview Bill Lair, and I said, how did you hear about General Hmong Pao? And I said, well, you know, during our border patrol out there, some of those villages talked about General Hmong Pao, how great he was, you know. And so when I was assigned to Vientiane, that's the first person I wanted to meet. You know, I wanted to meet General Hmong Pao because one of the things that, and this is according to the CIA book, you know, Thomas Ahern wrote a book using a lot of declassified document, and he basically, you know, in there he stated that the Lao didn't have the appetite to fight because they're Buddhists, right? And so the Hmong, because of the fact that Hmong live in the northern part of Laos, and that's where the Ho Chi Minh was sending his troops in and his supplies in, eventually down to the Ho Chi Minh Trail down south. See, people say the Hmong fought, and even the elders say the Hmong fought along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So we didn't fight along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. We fight in an area where before the Ho Chi Minh Trail became the Ho Chi Minh Trail, right? And so in the northern part of Laos, and our responsibility was basically to rescue American pilots who were shot down. They were doing bombing run in Vietnam. And so if you get shot down, fly into Laos, and the Hmong will rescue you, right? And also we guarded the radar installation, Lima Site 85, right? I mean, over 200 people said over 2,000 people, Hmong people actually died around that area. And American talked about, oh, we lost 11 American Air Force. And this is the first time that the Air Force lost so many people on the ground. Those people that were manning the radar installation up there were Air Force personnel. Wow. Undercover. Oh. And so 11.
They were the ones at Lima Site 85.
Absolutely.
Okay.
They were Air Force. You know, so they were, you know, manning the radar installation there. They're directing bombing runs in North Vietnam, right? And so the Vietnamese said, no, we know where you are. You know, we're coming. And so that's why they came in over, you know, took over using commandos and scaled a cliff and took over the Lima Site 85, Pupati. Tim Castle wrote a good book about that. It's called One Day Too Long. Basically, William Sullivan waited one day too long.
To get people out?
Yeah, to get people out, and also to do something about it, you know. And so, because my father was also stationed in Pupati, and he said when we were up there, we saw the Vietnamese coming. We saw them building roads. And so it was really high, and so when it was foggy, and when the fog cleared, we saw all the road coming through. And the United States wasn't going to do anything. William Sullivan was there. And so a lot of people blame William Sullivan for the fall of Pupati. But we got a radar installation. We rescued American pilots who were shot down. And we also harassed the North Vietnamese army. Okay, it's that they're coming through. We were supposed to engage in conversation, and I mean, not in conversation using military equipment. Because
really, very specific kind of conversation.
That's right, you know. And so we were engaging them, and at a high cost. At a high cost, you know, and later on I interviewed many of the elders that said, you know, at that time, again, it was more primarily defensive. It wasn't offensive. It wasn't offense at all, you know, so we were harassed. We come back, we harass, we come back, you know, and they said we could have taken over, but the United States won't let us. We could have destroyed the whole thing, but they wouldn't let us, right? And so that's, you know, that's why that's the other reason why Laos, there were more bombs dropped in Laos than there were bombs dropped during World War I, World War II combined.
It's amazing.
And the reason why was that when they were doing bombing run in Vietnam, not only just, you know, bombing strategic enemy territories, right? But also, if they're coming back fully loaded, they won't let you land in Thailand. In Udon, Thailand, right? Oh,
with the bombs?
With the bomb, because they could crash, right? And then you destroy it from deep. And so the pilots were encouraged to go into Laos and drop their bomb before coming back to Thailand. And so that's why it's a combination of destroying, enemy places, but also getting rid of the drum, and being able to use that.
So when they were dropping the bombs, I mean, weren't they possibly killing people? I mean,
yes, I mean, a lot of people died. I mean, enemies died, right? I mean, they're
right.
dropping on enemies, enemy dies. But then now what you have civilian dying because some of those bombs didn't explode.
Right.
So buried, right? And so people go and they use the land, cultivate the land, and then they dug it up and bam, And so we have a couple, even United States personnel here that are helping over there, like Jim Harris in Wausau, Wisconsin. He's helping to demine some of those sites. And
the bombs are still there.
they're still there.
Like
absolutely.
2017.
Absolutely. Some of the bomb didn't explode. Some of the bombies didn't explode.
Yeah.
So it's like carpet bombing, right? And so you drop them, and these huge bomb they would open up, right? And then all these bombies would fall out. And that's how it's carpeted. You blanket the whole area.
Wow.
And so some exploded, some didn't explode. So people are still dying from that. But, again, so it's not just during the wartime, but now we have peacetime and people are still dying.
Right.
So, but the Hmong people were heavily engaged and involved in keeping several battalions of Vietnamese forces away. And that's why many of the military officials says, if it weren't for the Hmong, there would have been more casualties on that wall, names on that wall in Washington, D.C. They said that the Hmong saved over 50,000 American lives.
Wow.
And we lost, over 40,000 of our people were engaged and involved in the war. And plus 50,000 or so people died trying to escape the war after 1975. So and not a lot of people know about that, because during the war there was no mention of the war in Laos, or that they're working with the Hmong people. They're hill tribes, right? So when we came to America and said we're Hmong, we were like, who are you? What country is Hmong country? And so many of the elders still today are still bitter about the fact that they're not being acknowledged, and because again they fight on behalf of the United States. And so...
and they weren't, oh, sorry to interrupt, but they weren't, the Hmong who came here, they were refugees who came here. They weren't immigrating here. They were
refugees.
They were coming as refugees.
Yeah.
And they also haven't been given military benefits or anything like that. I mean, they don't get veterans benefits.
Yeah. Put it this way, when you really think about it, I mean, I can understand the anger that shown by these veterans, right? My father was a veteran. I lived with my father in Long Giang. I was born in Long Giang and lived with him, and he was part of the artillery, heavy artillery, and he's completely deaf in one ear. Because of the constant firing, that 105 and 106, and but many other veterans, basically, after the war, the United States basically abandoned the Hmong people. There was no plan to resettle the Hmong people. In fact, when you go and look at some of the documents at the Center for Hmong Studies, there are documents, memo that says the hillbillies of Laos cannot survive, in the urban jungle of America. There was no plan to resettle the Hmong people. And there was no plan to evacuate the Hmong people. In fact, they all fled. It was only because a couple of the CIA personnel who, like Jerry Daniels and others who worked closely with the Hmong people, they were the one that sent plane. And these are people that have left already, and they've been decommissioned. But,
non-Hmong people.
Non-Hmong people who left already, they were paid to go back to bring the Hmong people out of Long Giang, right? And so there was only one C-130, and then two C-46, and then one C-47. And so the airlift, it took place only 2 days.
Wow.
And
so was it kind of like the Saigon Airlift, where it was like, I mean, that sort of iconic image that so many people have seen, where it's like these
Yeah, we were fighting. I mean, I was on the tarmac. I mean, we fought to get on the plane.
Yeah.
And when the United States pulled out, the CIA went to General Lee Pao and said, we can't take everybody. So who will you take? And he actually wrote a list. He gave him, the CIA, a list of who to evacuate. And that original list is at the Center for Hmong Studies. We uncovered that, like, oh, we heard about this list. Now there's names, right? So now we know who's on that list. And people that were on that list were the ones that were to be evacuated out of Lung King.
Wow.
And so now I interview some people, some of the soldiers, and they said, yeah, we saw all the planes leaving. Our commanding officer said to stay here. And so we stayed up here, and they went there, and the plane flew off, and we're left here.
Wow.
And even some of the people that said that, when General Lee Pao went to pick up one of his wife in Wen Jia, that they asked him, where you go, and say, oh, stay here, I will come back. He had no intention of coming back.
Wow.
So a lot of people, they're very bitter,
Yeah.
about being abandoned. And when you come to America and you walk in the street and people call you all these derogatory names and spit on you and ask you to go back home, the elders are like, I think they're very patient.
Yeah, no doubt.
They're very patient.
Yeah.
So when you look at resettlement policies, the Hmong were not to be resettled because we were too primitive. But how could we be too primitive when you used us to fight the war, right? You gave us equipment, they trained us to be pilots, give us M16 and all of that stuff. And that's why, key people like even Lionel Rosenblatt, who's with the State Department, he went over there and he was responsible for airlifting the Vietnamese and the Cambodian out.
Oh.
Yeah, and so when you see the helicopter airlifting people out, that's his. That's him orchestrating that whole thing. And he's very humble. He doesn't talk about it.
Right.
But that's him. And he almost got fired from the State Department over that.
Jeez.
And he had a warning. And so when President Nixon called him into the office, this is from him, he was telling the story, called him and say, okay, what you did was right, but it was against protocol. And so,
what can you do?
Yeah. So what do you want to do? And he asked for to be in charge of the refugee program.
For the Hmong?
Yeah. For all refugees.
Oh,
Southeast Asian refugee. So he went in, but then for the Hmong refugee, he heard about. He was helping to airlift to resettle the Vietnamese and the Cambodian refugees. In fact, we have refugee camps here in Camp Pendleton. I think in California.
Yeah, San Diego.
Yeah, yes, there are Vietnamese refugee camps down there.
Really?
They were airlifted to down there, right?
Wow.
So we thought that we have refugee camps in other countries. We actually do have refugee camps here, and we have some pictures of those refugee camps.
Wow.
In Camp Pendleton. But anyways, he basically said, okay, so we heard about this Hmong program here, let's go see who they are. And he went up there, and all these Hmong individuals had code names, like Lucky, Judy, they're all English code names. And he says, okay, how can they be primitive? So it was through his doing that the immigration door opened for the Hmong to come to America. If it weren't for that, we would still have been sent, we probably would have been sent back to Laos. A lot of people have been sent back to Laos.
And would have been killed.
And would have been killed. So,
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so we got a question. Yay, Facebook. We have a question. Lee Freeman says, has Minnesota or the United States recognized the service of the Hmong? What has been done to honor their service?
Yeah. I think there were several monuments that were built. And so one monument that was built in Minnesota was a bill that was sponsored by, earlier on it was sponsored by Representative Saitao. Didn't get built. And then Senator Phong He recently sponsored a bill, and so we built a monument on the Capitol to honor the veterans, right? And so I think that's good. And then there were a couple resolutions and so on and so forth. But what really the Hmong really wanted was, I mean, there's not many of them left, not many of the veterans left. Many of them dying. I mean, every day, I hear about it. I'm like, oh, it's so sad, because they're heroes during that time, And but what they really wanted was to be buried in military cemetery.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's what they want.
Wow.
Other people are saying, well, we want, medical help, right, medical assistant. So if you think about it, Agent Orange, right, was spread. And I know that when I spoke with Bill Lair, and he said, well, Agent Orange was never used in Laos. But, wind, right? You get wind.
Right.
And it was also used to clear opium fields.
Oh, really?
As well. And so and then I hear from my father-in-law saying, yeah, the entire hills was barren, because they spread all these chemicals. And so as soldiers, we would go out there, after it rained, we would drink from the puddle. And so one of the symptoms of Agent Orange is high blood pressure, diabetes, so all of these symptoms, and it's amazing that it's just interesting. I think that, for many of the Hmong veterans, and that they have these symptoms. And so the American GIs, veterans, they're getting the benefits already. They're getting compensation for it. They're getting treatment for it. But what about the Hmong people? Who were there, right? Who were there and who drank from these puddles. And then afterward, they were also spread by, they call it yellow rain, right? So Agent Orange, it's a chemical, dioxin, that was used to kill off all the vegetations. Agent Orange was a chemical that was manufactured by the Russians, and that were used by the Lao to poison people, to get people out of the jungle, the resistant fighter out of there. And a lot of people died because of that. Wow. And so I just uncover through the the recent declassified documents that the CIA just released, that the CIA actually had a whole report and say, yes, it was confirmed that there were chemicals and so on and so forth. And so there's still some of these things, but the elders are saying, we first of all, we need acknowledgement, right? And we need to be buried, in a cemetery. Even General Pao was not allowed to be buried at Arlington National Cemetery.
Where's he buried?
He's buried down in California.
Which is where he lived.
Yeah, which is where he lived.
Yeah.
But the preference was that he should be buried in Arlington.
Wow.
And they said, well, we never had anybody that's not part of the United States Armed Forces buried at Arlington Cemetery. That was a lie. There are other people that helped the United States who were generals and others that were buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Wow. So a lot of the veterans felt like hey, we got the short end of the stick. We were abandoned in Laos. We're not supposed to be settled here in the United States, and it was because of again, care and concern of individuals like Lionel, Jerry Daniels, and Mac Thompson and others that were here in America. Yeah. And even the criteria for resettlement was that there's 3 criteria, and one was that you must have families in the United States. Well, if you're Hmong fighting in the country of Laos, you don't have families in the United States, right?
Right.
And so, secondly, you must work for the Americans. So if you're working directly for the CIA, right, you were working directly for USAID, United States Aid for International Development, then you will have a preference. And the third is that you must have served in the armed force, in the military, and by returning, you might be in danger. Then you will get a preference to come to America. And so everything's tied to that military. So we're thankful that we're here and taking advantage of the opportunities, great land, of the United States. But, people say, Dennis Grace, who was with Refugee International, he said, the Hmong are the most deserving to come to America. But the Hmong are the least, they're the least that want to come. They're the group that don't want to come to America. And we still have some Hmong people in Thailand that didn't want to come to America. They're refugee.
Yeah.
In Thailand, they have United Nations numbers. Yeah. They're holdout from the war. Wow. They're still there.
Which was like in the 60s and 70s.
That's right.
Like decades ago.
That's right. And they're still there. And they're refugees.
Yeah.
So.
All right, we got another question.
Sure.
All righty, here we go. Ken Plant says, are the Hmong military members who made it to the United States eligible for VA medical medical treatment for their service and connected service-connected disabilities.
No, they're not. I mean, that's why many of the Hmong veterans group and the Lao veterans group are working hard to try to get Congress to do that. And Pentagon basically said, you guys didn't exist. You know, and so it's kind of interesting. You know, we have I just got done reviewing a letter by a colonel who used a lot of these declassified documents to make an argument on behalf of the Hmong. And he basically saying, and that's why he pulled out a lot of interesting stuff. I mean, I was going through, like, well, this is fascinating, you know, and because the Hmong, you need to be discharged, right?
Right.
The Hmong were never discharged.
Oh, from the CIA.
From the CIA, from the Army. So technically, they're still active, right?
Wow.
And so there's this classification with the Pentagon that you need to be, I think it's DS something, right? And that you have to be discharged in order to qualify for some of this stuff. So if you're active, you can, right? And the other thing was that, you know, when I spoke to some of the CIA, some of my CIA friends, and I said, well, do you have documents of who and who participated where?
Right.
Because that's what they're looking for.
Right.
And they said, well, you know, after the Vientiane Agreement of 1972, 73 there, we basically burned all the documents because we didn't want to leave any traces behind.
Oh.
So if the CIA burned all the documents, right? How are we supposed to know?
Right.
You know, and so I think that's the challenge. And many other people who are, I call it witness to the war. You know, policy witness, I call them, right?
Yeah.
Sullivan, Ambassador Sullivan, William Colby, the CIA head, right? To General Lee Pao, to Colonel Belair, to Vent Lawrence, who just died, you know, and to Hugh Tovar, who was the CIA chief of station, they just died. A lot of these key people are now dead.
Right.
You know, and so what are we waiting for? Are we waiting for one of the 5 or 6 left before you say, okay, we'll grant this to you? I mean, it's not like we're going to have thousands, you know?
Right.
And so it's not going to cost trillions of United States money. But these people gave their lives. And, you know, many of the Vietnam vets, they're sitting at home with their family. Is because we gave up one of our lives so they can be here.
Yep.
You know, one of my grandfather, you know, who's Colonel Lee Pao Xiong, which you attended his funeral.
Yep.
He rescued several American pilots who were shot down. In
fact, it's like 7 or something.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, one time he was telling me that they went and rescued American pilots, and the pilot keep on running around, and he lost 30 men. Just to save that American pilot.
Colonel Lee Chong lost 30 men.
He lost 30 men of his men trying to, and they finally had to tackle him, hog tie him, drag him out because he was losing men for trying to rescue this guy.
Wow.
You know, and it's kind of interesting. I spoke to his wife, and his wife said they identified this pilot. And so this pilot actually, they know who he is now.
Is he still
I don't
with
think
us?
he's not with us anymore. But
Yeah. Wow.
but so you have many of these people who are, I call it policy witness, who are dead, but who are actually witness to the war, who are no longer with us.
Wow.
And so now we're left with, you know, the foot soldiers. And what's
and they weren't
next?
dealing with like the officials.
That's right. They weren't dealing with the officials, so it's very difficult for them to take. So that's why, you know, work such as, you know, what we're doing at the center for Hmong Studies, collecting these documents, collecting them, having documents as well as photographs that will serve as, you know, evidence.
Evidence, right? That's amazing.
Say, yes, we were there. You know, we were there. Look at these American guys, right?
Right. All right, I want to ask you, we have another question, so I'm going to ask you that question, but I'm going to try to remember to ask you about the presidential daily briefs, but we'll get to that in a second.
Yes.
Okay, so Stacy Lee Yang asks, what are your fondest moments growing up?
Yeah.
So you were in Long Cheng.
I was in Long Cheng. I was born in Long Cheng. I was born in 1966 in Long Cheng, stayed with my father, lived with my father, so I could go to school in Long Cheng, right?
And Long Cheng, for folks who don't know.
It's the military base it's a headquarters for the CIA, and that's where it's the most busiest airport in Laos, right? At the time, there were more planes flying out of Long Cheng, bombing up in the Plain of Jars and other places, Taton Taven, than any other place, any other airport. And it was also the headquarters of General Lee Pao. So some of my fondest memory, unfortunately, it's not about war. It's about living with my father, I would stay with my father. And my father's still alive. And in fact, just last week, one of the researcher, Tuo Vang, who lives in Montana, he went and met with, last year, he went and met with one of the Thai Paru, one of the person that worked with Bill Lair, and that also trained the Hmong in Thailand, Pisanalok and Udon and Hua Hin. And he came back with a whole bunch of photographs. They took pictures. And so they posted on Facebook to
of Long Cheng now?
No, of the people that were trained in Thailand. Oh. And so he came back with a whole bunch of pictures. Oh. And he said, we want to identify these people. And I saw my dad on that picture and on that. And so I showed it to my dad and like, wow, where did you find this picture? No, he says, now I have evidence to prove that I was there. Yeah. Right. So it's very important. But Long Cheng was a very secret base. Prior to 1975, you would not find this air base on any maps, and yet it housed over 40,000 people. Wow. It's a big metropolis there to some extent. So I grew up with my dad. I grew up in Long Cheng, lived with my dad, and one of the fondest memory of Long Cheng was, my dad and I, we did a little garden. We planted a little garden, way in the foot of a mountain. And I would go with my dad, and we would go and pick green beans and corns and so on and so forth. And so I always, cherish those moments of going and spending time. And then also
at a military air base. I mean,
and a very military air base, and I've seen enough of my, I think my wife was telling me that I probably suffer from PTSD because I've seen enough war. Yeah. Enough death and destruction in Long Cheng, because when Long Cheng was attacked twice, right? And I was there both times. And in Long Cheng, growing up in Long Cheng, we didn't have toys. And so our toys were bullet casings and were styrophones that were shipped in with bombs, right? We would use the styrophones and we would use that to fashion that into airplanes. And knives, we would use the metal bands that would, hold the crates together. Oh yeah. We would sharpen those, and we use that as knives.
I bet they were sharp.
And they were sharp. We use them. We sharpen those and use that. And so I remember when Long Cheng was attacked, I woke up real early in the morning to go and scout out the flares. During battle. In the night, they would have these flares would be tubes, right? You hit it on something hard and it will fly up, and then it'll come down and there'll be a little parachute that would glide it down. Oh. And so it would come down and then
it's like a little light.
Yeah, you have a little flight here, and you have a light here, it flares here, and then you have the parachute guides it down. That's how you see at night. And so I love those parachutes.
Oh yeah.
And so I would early on in the morning, after the battle, I get up. I remember one time I get up and try to find those flares, and I stumbled upon a couple of the Vietnamese that were killed. Vietnamese commando that were killed.
Oh my God.
And on the side of the road, and I was the only one. And I didn't see anybody, but I was the only one there, and I saw them. I was like, whoa, so.
And you were like, how old?
I was probably I think at that time probably about 7 or 8.
Seriously,
This
can't
was
even imagine.
Probably about 7, I think 6 or 7 years old, you know, and but I was also there when they attacked Long Gang, and my dad was stationed up my dad was part of the heavy artillery. In fact, you know, like I mentioned earlier, he's completely deaf in one ear, you know, so when you talk to him and you're standing on the right side and he's not responding to you, he's not ignoring you, he can't hear you. I mean, and so I remember when they attacked, you know, I was they call it the presidential, the King's Palace. General Vang Pao built a King's Palace.
At Long Cheng?
Yeah, in Long Cheng.
Oh, okay.
And it's on top of, on the other side, right? And on the hill. And so my father was, his artillery unit was also stationed up there. There were a couple of stations that they stationed him. And so I was in the trenches with them.
Literally the trenches.
Literally the foxhole.
Wow.
I was with him because he took me there, you know. I lived with my father, so where am I going to stay, right? The battles are. So I was in the foxhole with my dad, and while my dad was out there firing the cannon.
And you're like 10 feet away or something.
Yeah, I was 10 feet away.
See, like, and to me, that's like just an amazing concept, because, I mean, we as, you know, a modern day whatever society, like the idea that your kids are hanging out with you on the battlefield is just completely foreign, you know. I mean, it's like your military goes away somewhere.
That's right.
And your family.
Well, the battle came to you.
Wow.
I mean, that's what it is. The battle came to you, and I saw a lot of plane crashes. And I remember one time, one of the C-47 crashed at the end of the runway, and for some reason we had a recess because our schools was very close to that, to the airfield, and so we see planes coming in and out all the time. So I ran out there, and when I got out there, the rescuers weren't there yet, you know. So I got out there, and the plane was like, you know, cut in half, and people were screaming, yelling. You can smell the jet fuels, you can smell the burnt bodies, you know, the raw bodies. And so when September 11 happened, I dreamt I was in ground zero.
Wow.
Because I could smell the jet fuels.
Yeah.
I knew what it smells like. I smelled the raw flesh, the body. I could hear people screaming and yelling, you know, and so that's when I said, you know, you're suffering PTSD. I'm like, yeah, you know, and even my dad was, I think my dad also suffered, obviously he does suffer from PTSD, because during September 11, he was glued to the TV, he wouldn't move, and it was, I can sense that he was very nervous. And I had a conversation with him, and he said, you know, we escaped war, and yet we came to America, and now his war.
Yeah.
You know, and thought this is the safest country in the world. I mean, just like General Vang Pao thought, the reason, I asked General Vang Pao one time, and I said, why did you trust the American? Why did you decide to fight alongside the Americans? He said, America won World War I, World War II. You know, and so America would never lose and never abandon us, you know. But unfortunately, he didn't know what Bill Lair was telling me. Colonel Bill Lair said, Lee Pao, never start a war during an election year because you will lose every time. So it's really interesting. Bill Lair said you will lose every time because during the election year, you will get trade, right? Back and forth, right? Because the reason we backed out was Nixon.
Right.
Right?
Right.
It was an election, right? And Bill Lair also told me, you never make an agreement with the communists. Histories have shown the communists never honor any agreements. And so when I heard that we signed an agreement with the communists to create a coalition government, I knew the war was over.
Really? You're like, that's it.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting, you know. I think I've been very fortunate that I grew up at a time and I took on a position that allows me to go and meet these people and to interview these people, or to be in the limousine with these people, or sitting in a bar drinking with them, you know, and to hear all these things from them. You know, I think I've been very privileged and been honored to have been able to you know, to meet General Vang Pao many times, Colonel Biller many times, some of the colonels many times, even Hugh Tovar, you know, the CIA chief of station many times. And so that's why when they did a memorial, they asked me to do a eulogy for Hugh Tova.
Oh, wow.
And so when they did the memorial service here, they asked me for Bill Lair. They also asked me to participate in that because of those relationships. But you know, it's but one person that I really would have loved to meet would be William Colby or Ambassador Sullivan. Those are the other two that I would love to meet. And I would love to meet Ya Totu, who was on the other side. He's Hmong on the other side. He was the most decorated Hmong on the other side, fighting against the Hmong on this side.
So was he Pathet Lao, or
he was Pathet Lao?
He was Pathet Lao, not North Vietnamese.
No, yeah, he was Vietnam. He went over, came from the Vietnamese side, right?
Okay, yeah.
And so the Pathet Lao are people that are inside the country of Laos,
in Laos,
right?
Yeah.
And so he led one of the, you know, the conflict in the Plain of Jar was some of his battalion.
Oh, wow.
He was in charge of that.
Wow.
You know, and so I would have loved to just sit down with him and just said, you know, we've only heard one side.
Right.
You know, let's hear your side. You know, your side of the
what was going on with you?
Absolutely.
All right, speaking of high rank, all right, we got another question.
Sure.
We have two questions. Fantastic. PD Rock wants to know, who is the highest ranked Secret War veteran that is still living?
I would say the highest rank would be living. A couple of them. You have Colonel Saigon Xiong, who's in a nursing home now, so he's not there. But we have also Colonel Tu Long. He suffered a couple strokes, right? But he's still, you know, he was here at the funeral talking, sharing about the conflict in the Plain of Jars. So there's a couple more. I mean, we have a couple of the colonels, and then we have some of the lieutenant colonels. So we have Colonel Li Deng, who is General Wang Pao's brother-in-law. Colonel Du Bo Lee, who was the more or less the chief of staff for General Wang Pao. I think he's the chief of staff or strategist for General Wang Pao. He lives in California. But these guys are old. I mean, they can't travel much anymore, and so it's incumbent upon us to interview them as quickly as possible. Well, they still remember.
Right.
And you know, I was fortunate enough to have been able to interview Colonel Nyesu Yang, who there were three major colonels that fought in the Plain of Jars. One was Colonel Saigon Xiong in Milwaukee. One was Colonel Xiong Xiong, and the other one was Colonel Tu Long Yang, and then Colonel Nyesu Xiong, Colonel Nyesu Yang. Those are the three main guys that fought the Plain of Jars. And you know, what's really important is that the Plain of Jars, you have Route 7 and Route 13 going through there, right? If you lose the Plain of Jars, then the Vietnamese could easily overrun, you know, Long Cang or overrun Bo Long. Bo Long is another strategic place. And if you lose that, then you lose Long Cang, then you lose Vientiane. So the Hmong were the defense, you know, manned the defense that prevented the country of Laos from falling to communism. And we did that at a great loss, you know, at a great loss. And again, not a lot of people know about it, but now I'm glad that everything's coming out, and I'm glad that even this documentary, that you will actually get an opportunity to listen to people who were there. Yeah. You know, and not just scholars who like to write books, but was not there.
Right. Right. No, for sure. Okay. I've got two questions here. Keep them coming. Keep them coming.
But to answer, I would say Du Bo is probably the highest ranking. Du Bo? Colonel Du Bo Lee.
And he's in California.
He's probably when you think about it, he's probably the highest ranking because he worked closely with General Wang Pao in administration. But the battlefield colonels, you have Colonel Saigon Xiong, you have Colonel Tu Long. So only a couple of these colonels are still left.
Wow.
Yeah.
They're all still in California?
Tu Long is in Wisconsin.
Oh, okay.
Colonel Saigon is Wisconsin, and then Colonel Tu Bo is in California.
California?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, good that they're still with us. But
Yeah, I don't know for how long though.
They're,
You know, I
they're
don't know
not
how long.
young men anymore.
No, they're not. No,
Yeah.
they're not.
Shulor asks, could you describe how you felt as a child when you first heard that your father, uncles, brothers were recruited to fight with the U.S.? What was going through your mind, and how did the Hmong villagers react?
Yeah, I think, you know, I was too young, right? I was too young, but I know my dad was recruited when he was 15 years old.
Wow.
You know, these were one thing
He was a kid.
Yeah, one thing to keep in mind, okay, was that the men fought. All the men died. There was nobody else left to fight, and so it was the children's turn. And many of those villages, they were drafted. Okay, so General Powell would say, and the CIA would say, if you don't send men, we won't send you supplies. Because it's a war, they're refugees, right? Living in villages. They can't go and farm because we're in constant war, right?
They're refugees within the country.
Yeah, you know, between 1962 to 1975, you know, we didn't have peace, right?
Yeah.
And so eventually it was children that were fighting in the war. And I think it's rightfully so to some extent. I think if they were older, they would not have been as brave, right? Because as we think as adults, right? Now that we're older, you know, we're kind of more cautious about this, or they don't take risks as much. But as children's, you know, and I was talking, you know, my pastor, Pastor Timothy Vang was saying, when we first went to the battlefield, we were 16 years old. And you see death and dying everywhere, and you know, helicopters would come in and they dump a whole bunch of people, and then people would jump on the helicopter and go. And it says, you know, at first you were like fearful, and then all suddenly you're just, you know, there's no fear anymore. You become hardened. You become hardened,
right.
you know, by this, you know.
Right.
And I was talking to another artist just last night, and he was talking about battlefield. He says, you know, if you're the only one firing the gun, you know, you may hear the gun fired, but when you're in a battle zone, you don't hear your own gun fired at all, and so you just keep on pressing the trigger, and you don't hear anything, and there's nothing, you don't hear anything at all. I mean, it's like that's the war, you know. And I know that when after I graduated from high school, I wanted to go into military, right? I was like, okay, yeah, my dad was in the military. I want to go into military. He's gonna be so proud of me. I'm gonna follow his footsteps. He says no. He says, you know, you watch TV, you think it's all fun. But wait until you're sitting in the foxhole in the trenches and your friend next to you dies. Then it's no longer fun, right? You know, and so he told me not to go into the military. He says, no, I don't want you to go. You know, we try to escape war. That's why we're here. Why would you want to go into military? You know, so I think, you know, again, for many of the soldiers, you know, I lost an uncle, my only uncle, my father's older brother in the war. I think for many of those soldiers, you know, to answer Shu's question, I think they felt that they were fighting to protect their country and their villages, and they were fighting to protect themselves, right? And so when they died, you know, we just need to give them that honor, that they felt that they were fighting for a greater cause, right? Greater cause than themselves. I don't think that they knew that they were being used by the United States as baits, because that's what they were.
Right.
To engage the North Vietnamese in conflicts so that the North Vietnamese won't go down to South Vietnam to kill the Americans. So we were used as baits by the Americans. And I don't think that they knew that. People like even General Lee Pao, you know, say, well, America will never abandon us. So therefore, we're going to side with them, right? I don't think that he realized that one day the Americans was going to pull out. If you think about it, America started pulling out in 1972 already.
Wow.
And yet, he waited until 1975, May 13, 14, 15, 1975, May 13 and 14, to evacuate they started evacuating the women and children of these colonels May 9th already of 1975. So the 13th to 14th, they finally got on the plane.
Wow.
Right? So why did you wait between 1972 to that, right? But I think at the same time, you know, I was talking to somebody, and they said, yeah, you know, during that time, because, you know, in 1973, 74, we signed the agreement, peace agreement, and we're going to create establish a coalition government. The whole country was, you know, celebrating.
Right, hopeful, right?
Hopeful. They were very hopeful,
Yeah.
you know, and they didn't anticipate that that the communists would renege on their promise, right?
Yeah.
And would take over the country, you know, because December 2nd, 1975, that's when they officially took over. I think that's when the king renounced his throne, and then December 3rd was when they announced the new government of Laos.
But they had already sort of
Oh yeah, they knew
physically
it.
taken
Yeah, they
over.
knew it because I think it was perfect timing because Vietnam fell,
Yeah.
Cambodia fell, so the Pathet Lao within the country of Laos, and at that time there were still 45,000 troops, Vietnamese troops in Laos.
Wow.
Okay, so they felt that, wow, this is the perfect time, so let's do it.
Yeah.
You know, and so I would say, let's give honor to those who died, because they died knowing that they did something greater than themselves, right?
Yeah.
They fought for something that's greater than themselves.
Yeah.
They fought to protect their country. They felt that they fought to protect their village, and they fought to protect their family. You know, so, and they died happy, I think, hopefully in that particular sense, knowing that they should, if they're not happy, they should die happily, knowing that they did sacrifice for that.
Major
And then as for the other stuff, we'll let God determine.
There you go. All right, speaking of family, this is going to be our last question because we are out of time for the live thing. But this is going to be our last question here, and then but there are people who would love to still talk to you on the after we're off live.
Sure.
Okay,
sure.
so you're available for that.
Yeah.
Excellent. But our question is, and this is like about family sort of in a way, and also something that we're going to talk about in the documentary, is what were the roles of Hmong women during the war?
You know, I think that they are key. You know, when you think about, you know, in Sam Tong, when Pop Buell with USAID, he came in and he created the nursing program. You know, they took care of those soldiers, you know, and bandaged them or prepare their bodies to be shipped back to the villages.
Yeah.
I think that's key. The other key thing is, I think, you know, the women protected the village. The men were off fighting. You know, here's a romantic story. When I came back to live with my mother in the Busan, the Valley of Busan, right? My mother had an army radio, and I would go with my mother to the highest point in the mountain, and she would call to check on my dad in the field, the Plain of Jars.
Wow. Like an old cell phone.
Yeah, that's right. You know, and so she would go and she would call and talk to my dad and say, how are you doing out there? Are you okay? And all that. That's romantic right there, you know.
Yeah.
So in the midst of all of these chaos and all these war and all that, there's still some romance, right? And so I think that women play a very critical role in keeping the family together. Also providing moral support to people like my dad in the battlefield. If they knew that they didn't have anything to come back to, I think that, you know, I mean, they wouldn't want to stay alive, right? But they knew that they have to come back because, you know, my dad knew he had to come back because there's my mom, there's my brother, right? And my mom took care of us. She was the father for us, right? She played two roles. So I think Hmong women played a very critical role during the war. Even though this whole war is about masculinity, it's about men, colonel this and colonel that, and all the colonels are all men anyways. So, and all the pictures that you see out there of people in combat positions, combat role, they're all men, right? And but you don't see women, but you see the women in the background. You see the plane landing, women in the background. When we got on the plane to get out of the country, we fought to get on that plane, from Long Keng. My dad pushed all of us in. And my mom was carrying my brother. So my mom was in there, I was in there, a couple of my brothers were on the plane. My dad, one of my brother, and my grandpa, grandma, and uncle, and aunt got left behind. And I remember, when we landed in Thailand, my mom turned around and said, "Where's your dad?" And I could just see the pain,
Right.
and the confusion and the fear in her eyes. But I stayed with my mom at the airport as the plane were coming in to see whether my dad was stepping off the plane. And he got off the plane. And that they were relieved, right? So just imagine, that's my mom. Just imagine other women, right? Other women who lost their husband, or other women who lost their husband while they're crossing the Mekong River, and they've had to be the head of household. I have an aunt. She lost her first husband in the war, never saw the body. Never was able to do any funeral services for the body. Her second husband also died. She never got to conduct a funeral. And she must have been young, at that age. And I remember at one of the family gatherings, she said, I lost 2 husbands, and I never had a chance to conduct a funeral for them. I never saw them. I never saw the body. So, after that, I decided not to get married, and I decided to be a mother and a father for my children. So if that's not a contribution, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, seriously.
And I think that we don't value that enough. We don't acknowledge that enough. And so I think that those women are the strongest. I think God created women stronger than men because they're able to tolerate, and they're able to go through a lot more pain, emotional and physical pain than the men. We're babies, and so I think that the women.
I'm not going to say that.
Yeah. So I think the women are stronger, and we have many strong women in our community, and we need to acknowledge the widower, the people who are widowed because of their husband gave their lives so that we can be here in America. So for all the young people out there who think that, I came to America on my own, you did not come to America on your own. And there were 3 criteria, as I said before. You need to be, you have families here. Well, you don't, right? You're not American. You need to work for the CIA, for the CIA or USID. Not many people, only a handful. You need to serve in the military. It's your father that served in the military. It's your grandfather that served in the military. That's why you're here in America. And so we earn a right to be in America. I always say, we earn a right to be in Thailand. We earn a right to be in America. And people in America say, we were nice and we let you in. No, we earned. We earned our way here.
Oh,
and
sure.
We gave our lives so that you can come back to your family. My uncle died so that you can come back to your family here. And so I think that's, for us younger generation, we're saying, we need to start saying this. And we need to also get the young people to really appreciate and acknowledge the contributions of their parents in bringing them to America. Just because your father doesn't speak English well enough doesn't mean that they're stupid. I don't think you can be in the same role as they were. I don't think if you were in the same role back then, you'd probably be dead. You probably won't know how to bring them to America, bring your family to America, and yet they came here, and they never knew they never been to America. We didn't know what America was like.
Yeah.
So America chose us. We didn't choose America.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, so.
I can't even. All right, so
I could go on forever.
You could. That's why you're an amazing professor, okay? I'm just saying. All right,
Takes the whole semester.
Yeah, take his class. All right, so we're gonna wrap it up.
Okay.
But people who are watching, who only maybe saw part of it or want to share. The video will still be on Facebook on the TPT page, so you can watch it till your heart's desire. And you can kind of keep looking on our Facebook page, and if you like the TPT or Twin Cities PBS Facebook page, you'll get notifications from us, so kind of keep your eyes out for when we'll be able to do the documentary. You're going to get to hear more stories from Lee Pao. And you'll be available to ask or answer some people's questions.
Yes.
And you can also still comment on the recording, if you will, that will be on Facebook Live. So you can kind of, or it won't be on Facebook Live, it'll be on Facebook. And you can just kind of keep, you can put some comments in there later on if you would like. So I think that's it. We're over time, but you know, it's not broadcast TV, so we can go over time.
Thank you, and thank you, the audience, for joining us tonight, and for your interest in learning more about the Hmong story.
Yeah,
you know, and the Hmong story. So
totally honored to be able to help people tell their stories.
Yes, thank you.
I think it's so important. It's so important.
Compliment TPT. You know, you didn't have to do this, and so you did.
Oh
so,
man!
Thank you for doing that.
I'm grateful
I think
that we are.
It's something that, you know, I think it helps bring closure to many of the veterans out there.
Yeah.
That we're finally getting a knowledge that people actually know us, you know, and know our contributions, and so I think it helps. You know, I was interviewing one of the T-20A pilots, and he said, we just need to be acknowledged.
Yeah.
You know, and nobody's thank us. You know, so that's why when I served in the Clinton administration, I was the chair of the Hmong National Development, and so I invited him to come to open the conference. He couldn't come, so he put a video together, and he acknowledged. That's the first time ever a sitting president acknowledged the Hmong contribution during the war and the Hmong contributions in America today.
Wow.
And the Hmong contributions in the future.
Shout out to Bill Clinton, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So.
All right, and the last thing I want to say, because I forgot to say this, the documentary, as well as the bigger Ken Burns gigantic documentary, will air later this year in the fall. Don't have an air date yet, so keep an eye on the page. All right, now we're going to be done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be
Appreciate
official.
it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're out.